A Jew going undercover at a Free Palestine rally to see what they're really about.
Hey, how would you describe a Jew? They're devils. Who's at fault?
The Jews. The Jews. Always been a problem.
So if they do take Palestine, where do the 12 million Jews go?
Go to hell. Yeah, that's the literal slogan.
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Okay, if we free Palestine, where do the Jews go?
Hey, go back to Brooklyn, bitch!
Shout out to Kanye. He was right.
In the wake of the war between Israel and Hamas, anti-Semitic hate and hate crimes are on the rise in Europe, in the United States, and all over the world. The number of hate crimes committed against Jews in New York City skyrocketed by over 214% year over year in October, in the wake of Hamas's brutal terrorist attack on Israeli civilians on October 7. In October 2022, more hate crimes were already directed at Jews than any other group, but that total paled in comparison to the total a year later when 69 such incidents were reported. New York City Mayor Eric Adams commemorated the 85th anniversary of the Kristallnacht pogrom in Germany on Thursday by declaring that, quote, the evil that was perpetrated upon German Jews 85 years ago still persists in our world today. Tonight, we honor the memory of those who endured Kristallnacht. We reject anti-Semitism and we recommit to live out the values of the words never again. Here is a video from Germany along the similar lines. Now that is a peaceful protest. If you're unfamiliar, Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, was a horrific incident in which Nazis terrorized Jews throughout Germany and Austria. On November 9th, 1938, the Nazis killed at least 91 people and vandalized 7,500 Jewish businesses. They also burned more than 1,400 synagogues, according to Israel's Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial. Up to 30,000 Jewish men were arrested, many of them taken to concentration camps such as Dachau or Buchenwald. Hundreds more committed suicide or died as a result of mistreatment in the camps years before official mass deportations began. Kristallnacht was a turning point in the escalating persecution of Jews that eventually led to the murder of 6 million European Jews by the Nazis and their supporters during the Holocaust. To commemorate this and stand with their Jewish population, Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Germany's main Jewish leader, Josef Schuster, were set to speak at an anniversary ceremony at a Berlin synagogue that was attacked with firebombs just last month. The commemoration of this horrible pogrom comes at a time when Germany is again seeing a sharp rise in anti-Semitism following Hamas's brutal attack that killed 1,400 people in Israel on October 7th and triggered the ongoing war in Gaza. What's the worst that could happen with rising anti-Semitism in Germany? And that's a rhetorical question. To me, it was often repeated, never again. It was a leitmotif in everything that was being said for decades, Traub said, adding he is upset by both the resurgence of anti-Semitism and the lack of a massive popular reaction against it. While there's no comparison to the pogroms 85 years ago, which were state-sponsored by the Nazis, many Jews are again living in fear in Germany and across Europe, and in the US, I may add, trying to hide their identity in public and avoiding neighborhoods that were recently the scene of violent pro-Palestinian protests. Jews in Berlin recently had the Star of David painted on their homes, and Jewish students in schools and universities around the country have experienced bullying and discrimination. Back here at home, authorities in Ventura County, California are investigating the death of a Jewish man who was injured during a confrontation at a dueling pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian rally, who died Monday. The sheriff's department said it appears he was hit on the head with a megaphone by an anti-Israel protester. Video posted online apparently shows Kessler lying on the sidewalk with his head covered in blood. Another video appears to show pro-Palestinian demonstrators continuing to shout slogans and wave flags after Kessler was injured, with police cars and an ambulance yards away. The same clip shows blood splattered across a homemade sign that said, "Stop bombing babies and families." The Ventura County Sheriff's Office investigating the incident and has not ruled out the possibility of a hate crime. Another Israeli opposition leader, Yair Lapid, said in a post on X, Paul Kessler was killed in Los Angeles because he was a Jew. It is not because of Gaza, it is because of anti-Semitism. This is what happens when protesters glorify Hamas and call to globalize the Intifada. They don't love Palestinians, they hate Jews. Jewish advocacy group, the Anti-Defamation League, reported last week that anti-Semitic incidents have risen by about 400% in the 2 weeks following the October 7 attack, compared with the same period last year. And in the wake of the recent Hamas massacre, a disconcerting report has been released revealing a 500% surge in anti-Semitic incidents globally compared to the same time frame the previous year.
Okay, so I'm really glad that that guy did the video in that protest and we showed it, because the people that I know that are in favor of ending the occupation and protecting the Palestinians, none of them think that crazy stuff, right? But just because that's my perspective doesn't mean it's everybody's perspective. And so seeing that is powerful. I mean, those words are awful. And so, man, anti-Semitism is a worldwide plague, and it has plagued this planet for so long. And we've been warning on this show about it rising again. And so we saw it rising on the right with Nick Fuentes and Kanye West and Donald Trump. I mean, go into it 100 times over. In fact, there's a story out today about how he kept telling, Angela Merkel told him that, hey, your rallies remind me in size of Hitler's, and he bragged about it twice. So, and then now we've got the situation in Israel and Gaza, and it's inflaming emotions. Look, if you think that it's quote unquote the Jews' fault, you don't understand anything, okay? So first of all, we're all human beings, and that's an easy thing to say, but I need you to internalize it. These are just stupid labels that we put on ourselves. Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Israeli, Palestinian, American. They're just labels. When you get rid of the labels, we're all the same. We're the same species. We're genetically the same. We're not identical, but as a species, you can't distinguish. The Israelis and the Palestinians, for example, are incredibly similar. One is just labeled one thing and the other is labeled the other. And hating them based on those labels is insanity. Insanity. And if you think you're defending Palestinians and you say things like that, not only are you being immoral, but you're being an idiot. So if Israel thinks that if this is driven by hatred of Jews and hatred of Israel and wanting to destroy the Jews, then they're never going to end the occupation. It's both immoral and deeply counterproductive. How dumb are you, right? And as the side that is interested in ending the occupation says, hey, criticizing Israel isn't the same as anti-Semitism, and don't hide behind that charge just to justify what Israel's saying. If you then turn around and say anti-Semitic things about Jewish people, well, then it is anti-Semitism, and you've destroyed that point. Again, dumb and immoral at the same time. Look, the Jews across the world have been oppressed for time immemorial. Why? Because they're different and they're outsiders, and it's in human nature to go, I don't like the outsiders. I bet all the problems are the outsiders' fault, right? And man, the courage that it took for all of those thousands of years to say, nope, I'm not gonna give into that hatred. And I'm not gonna convert, I'm not gonna do what you want. No, I'm gonna stay who I am. That is tremendous courage. And they have suffered more than any other people in the world. And so if you can't see that, you can't see straight, and hatred has blinded you. So I have more, but Mark.
No, I love what you just said. I love the summary, and I would just add one thing to bring us back to something that just produces a lot of combative exchanges, and that is, it's against that backdrop that Cenk just described, the history that the Jews have had of being a persecuted people, slaughtered, harassed, businesses destroyed, etc., and moved across the world from place to place where there's been more abuse. It's against that backdrop that the state of Israel was formed. And so Jews looking for a safe place felt there was a safe haven in Israel. And that is why Israel's security is so very important to the DNA of what that state is. And so when you understand that, you can understand how the piercing of that security, the violation of that security, the declaration of the desire to slaughter all Jews, to that state and to those people who are its inhabitants who've sought that kind of security, how toxic and radioactive that is. So again, that's to bring us back to what's going on now in the Middle East, but the rise of anti-Semitism, it has risen, I'm sure, and ebbed and flowed through the years, but there is just the search for the excuse when it comes to Jew hating.
Mark, I'm so glad that you said that, because that, I think, crystallizes exactly what is so painful about all of these last 2 months, or this last month since October 7th, for Jewish people around the world, is that people forget that, and it's so painful to be painted as some sort of evil force in the world when literally the Jewish people and the people in Israel are trying to protect the one homeland that they have. And when you're in the middle of an enormous Arab world with 30 plus huge countries, much bigger than Israel, and you have one sliver of land that the world community gave to you after literally the Holocaust, after no place to escape. I can personalize it for you like I did here once before when we were talking about the monster that is Kanye, that I said was gonna create so many more anti-Semites in this world and embolden and empower them. I just found this when looking through my grandparents' things, my dad's things after he passed, and I found my grandfather's frame. It says, "My family all killed by the Germans during the Holocaust, Pinsk, Poland, 1937, my dear parents and brothers." They were murdered. They were murdered by the Nazis, and the only place that my grandfather could possibly go to reunite with my grandmother and start his family was in Israel, in the newly forming, soon to be forming state of Israel, and helped form that nation. And the Jewish people have never had hate in their heart for any group of people. They've simply been brutalized and discriminated upon and pushed out of their countries in Europe and all over the Arab world, and were given one place. And that's why I think it is so important, and why I get so heated, and so many of us do, about this. Not that you ever need to excuse abhorrent behavior of the Israeli government, but you do need to give the same care when talking about this war that the Jewish people do when talking about the Palestinian people. Every time we speak, we say, every loss of innocent life is tragic. When we protest for simply releasing the hostages and for our ability to defend ourselves, they're always peaceful protests. They are not chanting death to the Palestinians like death to Israel and death to America is chanted. They're not spitting in people's faces. They're not beating people with megaphones. And for it to be presented as though this war started after the terrorist attacks of October 7th, and immediately in the first 2 days, the word genocide being thrown around, ethnic cleansing thrown around, when it ignores obvious facts like 20% of Israel is Palestinian Israelis, is Arab Israelis, 20% of the doctors and nurses in the country, they have Palestinian people in the government, a Palestinian person in the Supreme Court of Israel. None of what Israel is doing categorically has anything to do with the ethnic or racial or genetic makeup of the Palestinian people, because again, they are a perfectly equal part of Israeli society. It's simply the territories that refuse to stop decades now of terrorist attacks and bombings and cafes blowing up. I have a distant family member of mine who was blown up in a bus in Israel and started an organization to bring people together after that horrible event. When people present this war as though it's this Zionist devils that are trying to keep their boot on people's neck for no reason, it's just inaccurate. And it's really unfair, and it's very dangerous, because anti-Semitism rears its head so quickly like a tinderbox that people really need to be extra responsible and take extra care to make sure people understand we need to encourage the Israeli government to focus more tactically and not allow so much loss of innocent life, but also to respect their right to defend themselves in their one safe haven on planet Earth. And I don't hear that at all. And it's really problematic.
So, look, if you watch Young Turks, you know that Ben and I have disagreed about Israel a lot, and vehemently as we did today, and passionately. And so I think that the current government of Israel is headed in a very wrong direction, and I don't support their actions now. But having said that, guys, somebody's government is not does not represent the entire ethnicity, whether it's a race or religion. The Turkish government today, the Turkish governments in the past have done thousands of terrible things. Okay, that doesn't mean that the Turkish aunt down the street did anything terrible. She's just a normal human being. So whether you disagree with the American government, you shouldn't hate Americans. You disagree with, name a government. Doesn't mean you should hate the Russian government invading Ukraine. Doesn't mean that the Russian people are evil or terrible. What an absurd idea, right? So even if you disagree vehemently with what Israel's doing now, as I do, you should never say that that's because they're what? Because they're Jewish? Because somehow that makes them uniquely bad? Well then, why do the Turks do it? Why do the Saudis do it? Why do the Iranians do it? Why do the Americans do it? Why do we all do this? Because we're all human. It's about the power dynamic. It's not about the individual or the ethnicity. Ascribing it to the religion or to the culture is totally, utterly wrong. It's factually wrong. It's logically wrong. If you made that same assumption about any other government, it would be absurd. So, but I'm going to do one more plea for people to begin to understand why folks react the way that they do. And by the way, one more thing about the protesters. Look, I believe in protesting against the Israeli government. But when you make it about Jewish people, you lose the moral high ground, you lose everything. It's so dumb, so wrong. And then the people ripping down the flyers of the hostages, what are you doing? Why? They're innocent hostages. We want them all back. Why would you be against the hostages? I don't understand that insanity. But my last point. Look, guys, when I was in law school, I took an international law class on war crimes. And I was really privileged to have one of the prosecutors at Nuremberg as my professor. He was in his 80s or 90s at that point, and he had someone to help him as well. But we got to see the actual documents. It was amazing, and it was also horrifying. So I can't get those thoughts out of my head. And I remember one story of a Swiss businessman, and the Germans had invited him to kind of show off their facilities, and they thought they were going to make a deal with him. I don't remember now on what. It might have been gas. I'm not sure. Okay, for the chambers, yes, for the gas chambers. He was horrified by what he heard, and he turned on the Germans, and he went and got the message to UK and to America, who at the time weren't sure that the Jews were being massacred and that the Holocaust was happening. And he said, it's real, you gotta do something about it. What they're doing is inhuman. And the two things that stick with me is they built these giant concrete walls because they didn't want the gas to come out. And the businessman that was there that turned on the Germans said he couldn't get the screaming of the children out of his head. He just kept constantly hearing the screaming of the children. And then inside the gas chambers, you would see fingernails inside on the concrete, because imagine dying as a family together. Can you understand that trauma? Please understand that trauma. So when you're making an argument, even if it's against the Israeli government today and you're angry about it, etc., never, ever, ever make it about the Jews. Because one, it's wrong. Two, guys, the reason they needed Israel is because it's not even just the Holocaust. It's, Ben told a story before on the show about how his grandfather was taken away in 4 years, right, in a prison camp in Russia. It's happened all across the world. And again, the courage is unbelievable to go through all of that trauma for all of those years and to come out the other end and say, no, we're still Jews and we're not going to surrender, and we're gonna stick with who we are and what we know and what's right. And if you've ever been to a Passover dinner, you don't just pray for yourselves, you pray for others. And in fact, they pray for even for their oppressors in Egypt.
Right.
Okay.
Something that frankly the other side does not do when in the Palestinian territories, children are raised to hate Jews and to want to kill Jews, and that is the indoctrination of the population. And so while I so appreciate those comments about the Jewish people, Cenk, and you also acknowledge why Israel needed to exist, I guess what I implore you to do, what I hope that you can see is that when you speak about this in the future, that you remind people every time you speak about it of that history and of Israel's need to exist, like the Jewish people say that the loss of innocent life is horrible and tragic on the Palestinian side, but then when you do these stories as standalone stories and just get so angry and say they have their boot on the Palestinians' throats, as though that lives in a vacuum, as though they do that because they hate the Palestinians, when it couldn't be further from the truth. You just said they pray for them. They keep these blockades, they keep control simply because these territories and the neighboring countries have attacked them time and again. They have thus far refused to live in peace, and that is the only reason they are unable to allow them to be free just blanketly. There has to be a peace negotiated, of which again the Israelis have offered so many times. It skips over the history, it skips over the pain and the trauma, and it skips over even the recent history of 1 month and 1 week ago to simply act as though Israel is oppressors. Israel is the oppressed that came out of this oppressive history and this oppressive world and simply wants to live side by side with its neighbors. That's in the charter of Israel, not get rid of Israel like is in the charter of Hamas. And it's very important to remember that. Yes, call out every atrocity that you see, everything you consider a war crime, but please, I beg of you to also explain that. Say that Israel has the right to exist and they have suffered so many terror attacks and so much brutality while trying in this struggle, and they make mistakes and call out those mistakes, but be broad, cover it all.
Ben, I hear you, and we do, and we just did. But people can be, and not a people, a situation. You could be an oppressed and an oppressor. So I know I'm Turkish, so oppressed in Germany, oppressed as Muslims in all different parts of the world, but have been oppressors in the past. So it doesn't mean you should hate Turks. That's in the past, and it also means just because they're oppressed in Germany or in other places that the Turkish government gets to do whatever they want, and you can't criticize that. Of course not,
but
right?
In that exact part of the world, Israel still is under constant fear and attack. It's not saying, oh, in the past in other places, it's not a direct analogy. In that exact place, they've been trying to live in peace. Generally speaking, when a rogue soldier goes off, that soldier gets put on trial and gets put in jail, and should be. But that is different than being slaughtered and raped and burned alive just 5 weeks ago, and then acting as though it's a genocide and they're trying to ethnically cleanse and get rid of these people. They are not. They are trying to take out the terrorists that are in charge. And they might be doing it in a brutal way, and that's a fair way to phrase it.
Whatever you do, guys, whatever your opinions on Israel and Gaza, Palestinians, etc. is, please, I'm begging you, separate out the actions of governments and what you think of people at large. Okay, the American people are not responsible for the actions of Dick Cheney or Donald Trump or anyone else. And the Jewish people are not responsible at large for the actions of one government today.
But how about the Israeli people? How about that as well? I agree with you. The Netanyahu government, I've spoken out against them so many times, but they can also be separated from the Israeli people and the dream and the necessity of having a safe homeland, one in the world for Jews. And that can be reminded as to why this is so complicated each time it's covered.
Well, they had tons of Israelis in the streets in protest against Netanyahu before October 7th. I mean, Netanyahu has
millions.
Has been enduring. I mean, tons of these protests. So clearly, a huge chunk of the Israelis weren't on board with Netanyahu. The bizarre thing that's happened is after October 7th and the atrocities, that were committed. And by the way, when it comes to war crimes, it's just kind of wild that the Nazis try to cover up their war crimes. The Hamas fighters were calling their family
and live streamed them.
I mean, it's really another level of atrocity. But I mention it because that's the one thing that's produced solidarity in Israel, is that we've got to do something to. And so this government that was, again protested on by millions of Israelis prior, has found solidarity because of the Hamas fighters and the atrocities that the Israelis endured at their hands.
Do not hate anybody for who they are. It is preposterous, it is immoral, it is counterproductive. It makes no sense at all. And you would hate it if it was done to you. So do not do it to others.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.